Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Andrew Powell, co-founder and CEO of Ethos, as well as Manoj Srivastava, Chief Technology and Product Officer of Blackpoint Cyber. We're here to discuss how human capital and emerging technologies will determine the future of national and cybersecurity. It is great to have the both of you with us, and certainly a topic that is getting critical attention. Andrew, let's kick it off with you. Give us a brief background on Ethos.
Sure. So Ethos is a human readiness platform, and we serve both the public and private sectors. We think that the future of defense is really going to be determined by the people who are able to wield next generation technologies. And so what we enable is an organization to prepare their people for whatever the mission demands. And we think that that's a continuous state of readiness that you need to achieve, not just a one-time training event. So we're really rethinking training and education to be all about mission readiness, and proud to serve the U.S. military in achieving their goals.
And Manoj, I'm sorry, excuse me. Tell us about the work that you have going on at Blackpoint Cyber.
Yeah, so Blackpoint Cyber has been around for a few years. We're predominantly a managed detection and response company. Our roots started with our founder being in the offensive cybersecurity space. We're really focused on keeping the bad guys out. We got a world-class security operations team that's working 24/7 to help really keep the hackers out. What we've noticed over the past several years is it's really important to think about how you unify the detection and response aspects of cyber along with how you prevent in the first place and focus on cyber hygiene. So we at Blackpoint found it really important for us to bring those two different worlds together in a unified way, bring different tools together so that you have one unified way to solve that problem. So we've created a new platform that's focused on unified security posture and response. It's really about unifying the visibility across the attack surface, helping prevent risks and detect and respond in real time.
It's interesting. One of the synergies that exists, you're both focusing on readiness and the fact that it's not a set it and forget it type of solution. You are constantly monitoring and updating your response plans and so forth. It's not like cybersecurity, national security. It's a nice thing to have. It is an absolute, and I think it also offers competitive advantage.
Oh, of course. The issue today is you've got fragmented tools. You've got different tools that are really good at what they do, and they're really specialized. But the problem is they're looking at only one part of the attack surface, or they may be looking at a particular anomaly. You got another tool looking at a log, and another one looking at how you can respond to that action, right? But are those three tools actually talking together in the same language? And that's an important thing for us to think about, because otherwise you get attackers actually trying to exploit the seams between these different tools. That's where they thrive. They're just looking for the signal in the noise, and they don't really need a 0 day, right? They want you to miss that one detection, that one alert for them to exploit.
Yeah, and Andrew, it also comes down to human expertise. That's going to remain essential within this equation. It's not just you can deploy an emerging technology such as AI and that's going to solve all the world's problems. You still need a human in the loop, not just for compliance purposes, but to make decisions that these technologies don't have the ability to do.
Absolutely. We have been doing a lot of work in the world of unmanned systems, for example. So new drone systems that are coming online. And one of the really interesting challenges is actually the human aspect of that. How do you train a forward deployed operator to keep pace with all of the new emerging technologies or warfare practices that are literally changing on a weekly or even daily basis? I mean, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, their capabilities have evolved so rapidly to deal with new emerging threats that they're seeing on the battlefield. How can we learn really effectively from that so that all of our armed forces, if they're called to deploy, are equipped with not only the very best technology, but they're fully proficient in how to leverage it and then stay proficient as the underlying tech changes?
And that goes to Manoj's point about breaking down silos, that you're able to have this bird's eye view. And Manoj, at the end of the day, you need to be able to model out that risk, and you can't do it if you don't have access to platforms that are part of the model.
Absolutely. One of the things is usually the sentiment is like, well, there's an operational toll when you have different tools, and that's so correct, because you've got analysts who've got to look at different dashboards, look at different alerts, and then figure out what is really actionable, right? If you can bring all that data in one cohesive place, in one unified place, now you have a really clear view across all your different alerts and detections, and the context is really important, right? What is the context of cloud versus on-prem, and looking at different parts of the attack surface that you can look at the risk and then quantify actually what you need to prioritize and remediate. So that unification, it actually helps not only reduce the operating cost and the amount of labor and toil required, but it also gives you that higher level bird's eye view so that you're not having a blind spot to those seams.
You made a great point off camera that you want your engineers to understand the product and the product folks to understand the engineering and the design behind that. I think that is one of the most profound statements that anyone from the cyber community has brought onto the show. Explain why that is critical.
Yeah, that's something I always tell my team. You know, I think gone are the days where the engineers just focused on being technical and really good at their skill. That's obviously key, really important, and especially in an AI world, it's very important to be able to do that. But it's really important to also understand the problem that you're solving and the outcome you're solving and who you're solving it for. So I really love engineers being close to the end customer, and for my product team to really understand the technical side of it, right? You got to figure out how you can deliver things really quickly. The perfect solution may take a really long time to go out there, but the adversaries are not going to wait for you.
Right.
So how do you go about finding that balance? And that's important for the product guys to understand the technical side of it, and as well as the technical guys to understand the product side. I think it creates a lot more empathy between the two different groups of people as well.
Yeah, you have to remember too, Andrew, that the good guys and the bad guys are leveraging the same types of technologies.
Certainly.
So you're playing 4D chess.
Yeah, in a very complex, very high stakes problem space. And I think that's one of the things that we feel very motivated to work on. A lot of the public sector problems is, I think that what the US military is called to do is one of the most important jobs in the world. It's also one of the most complex, high stakes jobs in the world. And I think it's incumbent on us as kind of American tech entrepreneurs to contribute our best talents to try to help them do their jobs as effectively as possible, as safely as possible. And I think the recognition that we are in a global competition, and that certainly I'm glad to see a lot of other Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and investors focusing on defense. A thing that probably even just 5 years ago might have been controversial is now becoming more of a consensus that this is a really important space to work in. We need our very best and brightest to work on it, and we're proud to be one of those companies that's doing it.
So you're seeing a culture shift as it relates to defense tech?
I am. I mean, we went out to raise our seed round in 2020, and we got, honestly, a lot of very skeptical investors saying, why are you focused on defense? Why are you focused on training people? Are we even going to need people? And are we going to need pilots in 10 years? Are they going to go the way of taxi cab drivers with self-driving cars? I think there was a lot of skepticism about whether this was a good market to pursue. And I think thankfully the success of Palantir, Anduril, SpaceX, Saronic, some great companies that have been built that can show you can get great market returns and work on extremely important national security problems. I think are starting to really change that culture to where now probably the defense tech investments of the past year or two have just shown that there is a lot of enthusiasm for the space. And I'm just really pleased to see that. I think it's important for the future of America and our Western allies. Yeah,
and Manoj, that's a great point, because you do have to balance surveillance, civil liberties, the responsible and ethical use of these technologies, right? And that kind of all comes back to what's happening with cybersecurity. It's your job to detect, mitigate, respond, and the data is highly sensitive.
It is, and I think if you look at, it's very tempting to just look at immediately the data you have access to, but you got to look underneath about where is that software being built? Where is it coming from? What is the entire supply chain of the software? So especially, it's very tempting to go look at open source software, and that's a great opportunity to accelerate delivering product. But we got to think about, especially in this evolving economic landscape, where is the open source code coming from? Are we having the right security practices in place to be able to look at the risks, and is that a risk that is tolerable by the business as a whole?
Yeah, see, and that's what I think we're going to learn more about over the next, maybe 3 to 5 years, where there was such a rush in competitive landscapes to, whether it's internal, external, deploy these new technologies, particularly after generative AI became part of the daily vernacular. Was the risk thought? Was it a forethought or an afterthought relative to getting product out there? And I think we'll learn more as this continues to evolve.
Yeah, and you think about the migration from on-prem to cloud over the past few years, right? Right after the pandemic or during the pandemic, there was a huge shift to move to the cloud, and now you've got AI as well. So I think it's really important to figure out what do you have in your organization? What are the different parts of your attack surface? You can't really secure what you can't see. So starting with having unified visibility is important, and then thinking about what the different attack vectors are for those different parts of the attack surface. What is the security program that you want to put in place to prevent, detect, and respond? And then ultimately, what is the risk that you can tolerate?
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's where it comes back to, Andrew, people need to be able to analyze this and be at the center of it all to make those critical decisions, particularly with national security. We're almost seeing those lines blurred when it comes to national security and cybersecurity because critical infrastructure, the strength of our military, and so forth, our financial institutions, right? We're sitting right here at Nasdaq when it comes to healthcare, legal, education. I mean, the data's vulnerable.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's a hard problem to solve because I think the other thing that is very real in a competitive world is that going slow is a massive risk too. And if we're not leading in kind of frontier AI development, if we're not deploying those systems in production for very important military applications, then there will be adversaries that have a leg up and are faster and more effective than we are. And so I think there's the risks inherent in some of these things, but I think an underappreciated aspect is just the risk of going too slow. And so finding a way to do this at speed such that we can have the very best tech to our warfighters as soon as it is ready, but also have confidence that it's secure. And that's where I think software and AI can come together alongside really great policy innovations or just bold strategic leadership on the DoD side, which we're seeing a lot of amazing efforts to reform how acquisitions work, how accreditation for software works, things like that can really enable us to, I think, deliver speed and security.
So public-private partnerships in academia certainly play a role in balancing all of this out.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just one example, so we have deployed our software to classified networks, and the process of doing that was probably a year of our smartest engineers working full-time on trying to get through all of these wickets, and the limiting factor on a lot of it was actually more so the policy elements than the technical elements. The technical problem was hard to solve, but we solved it. But then going through all of the policy wickets to kind of demonstrate that we were in compliance with this kind of authority to operate process is so cumbersome. And there's been some great innovation to try and make it smoother, but I think just recognizing that it is very, very hard and it's not kind of a smooth, easy process is why I think we'll need kind of a whole public-private partnership alongside legislation to reform things to get to this place where we can build the very best tech here in America, and we can leverage it for the most important missions in the world.
Which is interesting, Manoj, because we're hearing the same conversations as it relates to energy demand and evolving policy. So we'd have to wait 8-10 years to get grids online or other sources of energy. So it feels as if we're at an inflection point as it relates to policy, not even just US policy, but global as well. You have to operate in multiple jurisdictions, and that has its own set of complications.
Oh, totally. You got different regulations when we think about compliance requirements. That's something that we run into, right? So you got different policy frameworks in place. And again, going back to my earlier point about cloud and on-prem, you got different compliance policies that make sense for when you're looking at securing cloud. You're looking at Microsoft 365 cloud environments. The posture policies that you need to enforce is very different than the policies that may be on-prem, or even depending on the industry vertical, right? We're looking at HIPAA, or you're looking at, depending on if you got clients in Europe, you need to think about other frameworks. So it's very important to be able to look at where are you actually selling a product and what are the frameworks that are really important for them, and not when you actually got a product that's ready to sell, right at the time of when you're trying to identify the market.
That's an excellent point, because sometimes with these emerging technologies, Andrew, there's solutions for problems that don't exist. You want to solve for these types of problems. And I think, sectoral policy versus a one-size-fits-all solution, I think that's where we're going to need to see policy evolve, certainly on a global basis.
Yeah, and I think within kind of defense specifically, the best combinations that I've seen is where you can bring great military expertise and great technological expertise together. That's one of the cool things about being in a Silicon Valley tech company is we can go in as a commercial tech provider that's bringing innovation that is kind of leading edge from the private sector into kind of a military setting. But then we've really benefited from working with senior leaders on the defense side who can help us understand really what their pain points and problems are. And I think that's where that magic of the understanding of the military needs, the understanding of the technological possibilities, and then kind of working together as a team to try and get through whatever policy or technological barriers might exist to getting solutions fielded.
Manoj, are we winning against the bad guys as it relates to cyber?
I'm generally a very optimistic and positive guy. I think that's how I look at it. There's always going to be the bad guys. There's always going to be adversarial attacks that are going to impact us. But I think at the end of the day, as long as you focus on the right cybersecurity practices, you focus on cyber hygiene, you get the right methodologies in place up front, you got a right detection response methodology in place, the right tools, the right platform, and you can't do it without humans. Even if you got AI, I think the best world is really a detection response world where you got a combination of AI and human-led responders. That's the perfect balance, and I think ultimately the good will prevail.
All right, appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.